Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Contrarians. We're here with another Dark Horse special panel edition. These episodes, usually what we do is we have a good, intelligent little crew, and we go around and we pick albums that are Dark Horse albums, not necessarily the best album from a band, usually albums that kind of rank in the middle or close to the bottom even. And we kind of get people that are on the fence on one side or the other. We rate it out of 10, and then we give you our average rating from all of us. So welcome, everybody. How's everybody doing tonight?
Nice to see everybody.
Great,
Happy
Marco.
Friday.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. And Reed, looking good as always with that sweet Contrarians t-shirt. T-Public link is in the description. All of the links for these folks' channels and where to find them will be in the description as well. So everybody has, well, some of our folks have things going on in other channels and stuff like this. So check out the description link. Other than that, you can like and subscribe our channel. And we also have a Patreon if you want to join any of our conversations. Patreon at any tier will get you on these panel discussions. And we also have a Ko-Fi if you want to donate to the channel without subscribing on a monthly basis. So today's topic is Black Sabbath, Born Again. I have a little bit of research. I'm going to go through this research very quickly. So there was a single release for Black Sabbath, Born Again. It was trashed. According to the Never Lying Wikipedia, it did not chart. And Born Again has supposedly never certified from the RIAA. The Guardian ranked the Black Sabbath albums, put Born Again at number 11. This is what they said. According to Sabbath mythology, Born Again should have been smothered at birth. Actually, it's pretty good. Ian Gillan, whose only recordings with the band these were, still had his voice, and the other three were pretty focused. Of course, Gillan's lyrics were awful and very un-Sabbath, but it was the best record he had been involved with since his time in Deep Purple. Their number one was Master Reality, interestingly enough, which is one of my favorites. Rolling Stone Reader Poll had Born Again at number 8. Black Sabbath briefly went into crisis mode when Ronnie James Dio quit the group. This extremely brief period of Black Sabbath has been mocked for years. The Demon Baby artwork has been called the single ugliest album cover of all time, and the tour was such a disaster it inspired This Is Spinal Tap. All that said, Born Again is far from a musical disaster. The fusion of Deep Purple and Black Sabbath yielded some very nice songs. Their number one was Paranoid. Kerrang had Born Again at number 14, so that's the lowest of the ranking we've seen so far. Gillan has held his hands up and called himself the worst singer Sabbath have ever had. A slightly unfair assessment, as the problem here is that the combination is like putting your shoes on the wrong feet. There's bangers to be had. Zero the Hero, Trashed, Disturbing the Priest, but it largely fails to fit together. Talking of failing to fit, the Born Again tour featured a Stonehenge so enormous the band had trouble fitting on stage around it. Their number one was Paranoid. And here's one quick user review I got from AllMusic. This individual gave Born Again 2.5 stars out of 5 and said the artwork is horrendous, the production is muddy, and the songs are by no means Black Sabbath in their prime. Still, it's a decent record, one that's terribly underrated and doesn't deserve the scolding hatred it has suffered through the years. Give it a chance. We have one regret. Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation was supposed to join us tonight. He was unable to, but he submitted a video, which I'm going to show for you right now. And here's Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation.
Hey everyone, sorry I couldn't be here today in our catch-up with the Black Sabbath Born Again. There's a couple of albums that I am just totally obsessed about, and this little number from 1983, since it came out, I've been obsessed about. Black Sabbath Born Again. So where do I start? Is it the doomy, heavy, sludgy guitar riffage of Tony Iommi? Is it the what the hell Ian Gillan fronting Black Sabbath? Is it the lurid album cover of Black Sabbath Born Again? Is it the off-the-wall lyrics of Ian Gillan? I think it's a combination of all of the above that's hooked me in. This album was critically reviled in 1983, and I can say that out of the Black Sabbath canon outside Ozzy and Dio, this has been the most critically reappraised album out of the whole catalogue. More and more fans are slowly warming to it. It has influenced a lot of bands, more so in the extreme music area, but they have got on the wagon and pushing it along. It's an album of immense power, but a lot of it is really accidental. For example, Exhibit A, the album cover. This was originally, I don't have the name of the designer, but he took a photograph of a baby and did the most deliberately garish colors so he could get dropped from doing the album cover for Don Arden. Black Sabbath loved it. This has launched 1 million t-shirts. The muffled sound, the heavy riffage sound of the album. There's some conjecture that the master tapes were sitting on a console, overheated, and that resulted in that really sort of distorted, muffly sound. Accidental. And it's led into the whole soundscape, which people have hooked into and probably has launched 1,000 different bands. The accidental nature of this album. Other things that I like, the off-kilter sort of lyrics. Where in the Black Sabbath canon are songs about driving go-karts around, the fields of a mansion half drunk, disturbing the priest while recording an album, hotline, phone sex. It's just so off the wall and so un-Black Sabbath, but it makes it compelling. So other notable mentions about the album is that there are 2 superb, dark, disturbing instrumentals of Jeff Nichols. Sound like they were sort of offcuts from The Exorcist. You've got Stonehenge and you've got The Dark. In itself, turn down the lights, put on a candle, and listen to that and not be scared witless. So, final word, Zero the Hero. That's got one of the greatest Black Sabbath riffs of all time. I'd put it in my top 5. And you can understand why Guns N' Roses cribbed that really heavy riff out of that song. It's just magic. So you've got a package here. The album, it's grown in a critical appraisal. It's getting more and more people on the wagon, and I'm certainly on the wagon, and I give it a strong 8 out of 10, and I'm definitely in the camp Born Again. And to be quite frank, when Tony Iommi finally gets around to remastering it, will it be the same? Will it actually improve, or will it lose its mystique by unmuffling it and making it a lot cleaner? Because I think a lot of it has its mystique because of that accidental sound, which is muffly and dark and has a sense of evil. Anyway, look forward to seeing what you guys have got and how you rate this album, and catch up with you soon.
That was Peter Kerr. He gave the album an 8 out of 10. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go around to our esteemed panel, and let's start with Reed. Why don't you tell us what you think about Born Again and what you rate it out of 10, and where to find you if we can find you.
Okay. I'm not anywhere else on the net. Very glad to be here. Been looking forward to this chat. So Born Again, let me kill the suspense right off the bat and say I love this album. I love it unconditionally. I think it's the perfect Black Sabbath album. Not the best Black Sabbath album, weirdly enough, but the perfect Black Sabbath album. I think that if you took a theoretical individual who understood what heavy metal music was, and you told them that you were going to play them a heavy metal album by a band called Black Sabbath, Born Again is what they picture in their mind before ever hearing the music, right? Unlike the reviews it's had over the years, I think it's a perfect melding between Ian Gillan and the band. I think that in 1983, this album was the heaviest album that had ever been released by anybody. It's one of only 3 albums of Black Sabbath that I think are as heavy on album as they are live. The others being Mob Rules and Dehumanizer. So it really captures this amazing sound. Now, the production is famously murky. I get it. after all this time with it, though, I can't imagine it being remixed and how it would sound better because I have simply grown to love it. I think it has one of Ian Gillan's best ever vocal performances. Gillan is always an up and down lyricist. Some of his lyrics are amazing and some of them are just doggerel that he threw in because he wanted to rhyme. This album maintains that tradition. It has some fantastic soloing by Tony Iommi. It's not always his best riffing. I think if you go through his career, in fact, it's kind of like the albums are either he's soloing great or he's riffing great. He rarely does both on the same album. And of course, you've also got Geezer and Bill. So it's the full Black Sabbath lineup, just with a different singer, unlike Mob Rules, where they brought in Vinny Appice. So I wanted to bring in just a little bit different perspective on this album because Born Again was the first Black Sabbath album I actually heard as it was released in 1983. I had a friend who was a stereo hi-fi junkie. Now, I was 15, so it's pretty unusual for a 15-year-old kid to be that much into stereo equipment, but he spent all his money on stereo equipment. You know, most of us had like little boom boxes. He had a Kenwood receiver and giant speakers. He had a graphic equalizer. He was the first person I knew with a subwoofer. And he called me and said, "You have got to come listen to this album." So he had a room in his parents' basement and very understanding parents. So he could just play this music as loud as he wanted to. And I want you to try and imagine sitting in a dark room, listening to Born Again for the first time, cranked up to ear bleeding levels with a subwoofer. And it's going through Stonehenge and it has that heartbeat, boom, 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 boom. And then it crashes into Ian Gillan's scream. And that is not, I defy anybody to call that music. That scream is not music. It's freaking deranged. It's the sound of a lunatic losing his mind. And it's one of the two most visceral experiences I ever had with music, listening to that in Jeff's room and just going, "Oh my God, what was that?" It was so powerful and so impactful, but not in a good way when I was 15. And then you get into Gillan's lyrics, and I didn't know much about Ian Gillan, and I didn't know that he's really an irreverent guy. He's a very tongue-in-cheek guy, and I'm sure that he wrote songs like Disturbing the Priest. To him, that's a cartoon, I think. It's a parody of a Black Sabbath song. But I grew up in a very conservative, very religious Christian household. People can say whatever they want about that in the comments, but that was my upbringing. And let me tell you, you could not play an album with a demonic baby on the cover, with the guy screaming like a lunatic, and then singing about disturbing the priest and tell your parents, "Hey, it's all in good fun." No, that shit didn't fly in 1983. And I don't know about Canada, but in America, we had a little period of time known as the Satanic Panic. And that has kind of lost its sting now, but this was a real thing. Parents were really afraid that heavy metal music was leading their kids into all kinds of dark areas. If you watch the famous, The Decline of Western Civilization Part 2, The Metal Years, there's a scene where a parole officer is talking about heavy metal kids and how so many of the people that she works with are into Satan worship, and how the horn sign has 3 6s in it. And, she didn't make that up. That actually, there was a part of the community that was into this. So even though it was very overblown, this was a real thing. And that really made me take a step back from this album and go, I don't know if I need to be into this, right? So I gave it years and didn't get back into it until I was in my 20s. And then I was like, oh man, yeah, this album is freaking perfect. And as much of a gut punch as Stonehenge and Disturbing the Priest is, The Dark and Zero the Hero is more of a sucker punch. That screaming siren, or possibly Demonic Baby, if your mind is already kind of moving that way from the album art, right? And then it crushes in with that, and the tritone riff, which is just a slight variation on the riff from Black Sabbath. Oh my God, that is the other most powerful musical experience ever. Just crank that up. Sit in a darkened room and crank that up until you can't stand it. It is amazing. And I will say Zero the Hero has a combination of what I think are some of Gillan's best lyrics and some really stupid couplets like, you know, sitting by the river, the magic in the music is they eat raw liver. Like, what the hell, Ian? I guess he just needed a word that rhymed, right? And I don't know if he wrote that about a specific person. It's tempting to say he wrote that about Richie because that song is just insult after insult after insult, right? Accept the fact that you're second rate, your life's a 6-lane highway to nowhere, walking around the city with your balls and your head full of nothing. Like, oh man, whoever he wrote that about, he hated that person. But then we move beyond there, and the back half of the album it's not quite as good, but I still love all of the songs. I think the song Born Again is actually kind of boring, except that it has Gillan's best vocal performance. I will put that vocal performance up against any other song he ever recorded. The music is almost like a variation of Planet Caravan, right? It's just a slow drifting jam. But Gillan, his voice over the top of that just goes on and on and on with this weird psychedelic poetry, and I love it. And then the other 3 songs, I actually think could have been Deep Purple songs. Now, they would have had a very different orientation to them, but I can imagine Keep It Warm or Hotline, especially Hotline, that could have ended up on Perfect Strangers. So I think it was a great meld between the two. I think it has Black Sabbath's most powerful musical moments. And again, I think Ian Gillan owns this album. He may call himself the worst singer Sabbath ever had, but I love it. I think his voice on it just absolutely rules. And I give the album 10 out of 10.
Wow. Nice.
10.
Good stuff there, Reed. Excellent.
Excellent.
Told you, I've been
really
preparing
cool.
for this one. I've wanted to do this so bad.
That was good stuff. Those some really cool points. Yeah.
Thanks, Reed. And you're looking sharp today, by the way. I'm going to throw it over to Peter. Take it away, Peter.
Oh, thank you again. Great to see everybody, and happy Friday.
Yeah.
I'm going to start right off the bat and share a lot of the sentiments that Reed had. Absolutely, completely love this record. Top to bottom, everything about it. One of the things that you think about when you think of this record is all of the litany of stories and rumors and events and things that happened around the creation of it and the tour. Right off the bat, here's Don Arden, who's now Sabbath's manager, and his daughter Sharon is managing Ozzy, and now they're butting heads, and Don wants, he wants to make Sabbath the biggest band in the world. So he's like, well, let's get Ian Gillan. And they're like, to quote Geezer, he's like, what the bloody hell is that going to sound like? He's got no idea. And so he hires the same cover artist that did Blizzard and Diary, who's working for Sharon, and says, here, come up with this cover. So he does everything possible to make something and send something that he hopes will reject. They don't want him to have it. He wants to stay in good graces with Sharon, but they offered him so much more money. He's like, oh, what do I do? And Arden loved it. And he's like, this is great. We've got to have this. And now he's stuck. He's like, oh gosh, what do we do now? What do I do now? I'm stuck between these two camps with this horrible album cover I'm going to be associated with the rest of my life, And so here they are coming post Dio. They have the Stonehenge problems. That's history. The fact that the stage set in their real world was so big they couldn't even get it in most of the arenas. Of course, we all know that is inspiration and direct source material for Spinal Tap. They just went the opposite direction. The fact that Don Arden hires a dwarf, puts him in a red suit, and has him open the show on top of one of the Stonehenges and fall to his death as the band starts their show. Who does that? And Bill Ward comes in, and we saw the picture there behind his head. He looks healthy because he was healthy. It was the most sober he'd been. but he didn't end that way. And he relapsed and was in real bad shape, so much so that he doesn't even play on the tour. You know, we've got the story in Trashed. Gillan borrows the Ford Granada from Bill Ward, drives it around the golf cart track on the Bronson Manor, crashes the thing because he's completely wasted, crawls out of it just before it catches fire, and gets out alive. And of course, we know that Gillan's lyrics are great when he can write about true life things. Obviously, Smoke on the Water comes to mind. So he writes a true life story about being wasted, driving this car and trashing it. And, you know, and then the last issue is when they were rehearsing out in the countryside, they're visited by priests telling them to turn down because they can't have choir practice because they're too loud. So here's Gillan again. I'm disturbing the priests. Well, you could use wordplay and really say disturbing the peace. You could do anything with it. He makes it very heavily religious, but as Reed said, you can tongue-in-cheek it, and it works lyrically for Sabbath, but it also works as what Gillan does to kind of make fun of stuff. And so that works. Let's talk about the sound. Yes, it's murky. It's muddy. People don't like it. Supposedly the speakers were blown, or whatever the story may be. I really don't care. I use the only test that has ever been true to me, and it's how bad the hairs stand up on the back of my neck when I hear it. And when we heard it in 83, they stood up then, and they stood up this whole week when I went back and listened to this. It does not a revisit because I listened to this continuously, but the hairs still go up. So whatever the problem was, it doesn't seem to bother me whatsoever. And there's a Japanese philosophy called wabi-sabi. It is about perfection and the lack of perfection, or the beauty in imperfection. And that's the way I think of this record. It is perfectly imperfect. Wrong cover, wrong singer, lyrics are wrong, the sound's not right. And yet I can't stop listening to it. I love every aspect of it and can't get enough of it. So maybe it's that uniqueness of whatever aligned at the time makes it into something that I found to be completely glorious, but understand that there's probably no middle ground with this record. You either really like it or you don't like it so much. As far as the songs and the tracks, you know, they followed tradition from the last several records, Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, and even what Dio did with Holy Diver and Last in Line. Fast up-tempo song, and it's what Purple did with Machine Head. You've got Highway Star. So you've got this real up-tempo driving theme about his car wreck, and what it does is right off the shot, besides establish that Gillan can still scream, which I enjoy every single one of those wicked unleashes that he does. I love every one of them. It introduces to me what I call the primal beast. And this is all about Tony Iommi's guitar. It is so huge. It is so big. It is so thick. I envisioned if the earth was forming and mantles were breaking and crushing, Tony's guitar is the soundtrack for what's happening on earth. And it works perfectly for me. When you get to, you know, they call it a track, and I think it's kind of misleading, you know, Stonehenge into Priest and Keep It Dark into Zero the Hero. They're just intros. You might as well just kind of link them as all the same thing. But Disturbing the Priest has just got one of the heaviest riffs, and those are the biggest power chords you're ever going to find on any record. And when they've got that beautiful underlying bass underneath, and he just cuts loose, and I can never get too much of it. And so from that standpoint, it's part of side one, which I really love. And so then we get to Zero the Hero, and my kids, all four of them, I used to play this all the time when I was home with my kids, excuse me, and they used to walk around the house. They didn't have any idea what I was listening to until they heard this, and they'd walk in, they'd all be like, Zero the Hero, and off they'd go and go play into something else. So it's a very memorable track. Very influential riff. We can talk possibility about how maybe Paradise City and some of the stuff afterwards may have been influenced by it. Don't know. But it's heavy, and it's evil, and it's dark, and it's malicious, all the things I love about what's going on this record. When you get to side 2, I think Digital Bitch is a straight traditional rocker. The riff is great. Again, so much screaming, and Gillan's just kind of unleashing, and the rumors, did he write it about Sharon? Never been confirmed, not in anything I could ever see. So perhaps just innuendo. But he's so aggressive in his voice. And to me, that's some of the strongest screaming he'd done since back in his In Rock days. And I really enjoyed that. Born Again is, like Reed said, I think the beauty of this is Tony Iommi's solo. This is one of his most emotive and melodic, and he's not playing quick riffs. It's just got such a tonality, and it sounds like it would sustain for about a month if he just let one note go, and it's just so controlled and so beautiful. And Gillan sings extremely well on this. Hotline, another kind of killer riff, reminded me of a little bit of Lady Evil from Heaven and Hell. It could be a Deep Purple track. I agree with Reed on that. It's pretty straightforward, but it's just a great song. But the screams at the end are crazy, and it just keeps going and going. And you think, okay, that's enough screaming. No, more screaming. And I'm like, okay, that works. Keep It Warm. Again, I think, agree with Reed, that's the most Deep Purple-ish sounding track on the record. To me, it's, something maybe off of Who Do We Think We Are, right around that era, and then maybe even going into Perfect Strangers. But the whole record works for me, and it's amazing because they talk about how maligned it is in some ways, but it reached number 4 in UK, which was higher than both Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. And they hadn't had an album seat that high since 73 when Sabbath Bloody Sabbath came out. So something was going okay. And they were only a couple positions off of where the US charts were with both Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. So this wasn't, it came out and was forgotten and dismissed album. It had some legs. Now, of course, it can't go any further than the tour, which was only a year, and then they were done. But so for me, this is also a 10 out of 10, and I think it is the perfect imperfection album.
Nice. Good stuff. Good stuff, Peter. Very cool.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I'm going to send it better myself, and I'm going to send it over to Joe, who's got a bit of a reputation on Dark Horse albums, and I'm wondering if we're going to hear your famous line today. Is this a bad album done by a good band?
No, it's an average album done by a great band. So the either love it or hate it thing. No, I'm kind of in the middle. When Dio left, I mean, Holy Diver's out at this point, which is just a phenomenal album. And I'm a huge Ian Gillan fan, huge Sabbath fan. I think Ian Gillan, the Gillan band, Men of War off of Double Trouble is just like one of my favorite songs. So I had high expectations for this album. And when it came out, I thought it was pretty good. Yeah, the production's a big issue for me. Reminds me almost of Hotter Than Hell by Kiss. Just it has that tin can sound. I just don't, it's just an average album as far as I'm concerned, because I love the Sabbath output, Technical Ecstasy we talked about before, and Never Say Die. Started to tail off, but Ozzy had the amazing 2 solo albums, and then the Dio albums. Mob Rules is just I love that album. Vinny Appice took it to another level. The production by Martin Birch. So this was definitely a step down. I was really pumped to having Ian Gillan, but I was kind of like, another lead singer, really. So I had high expectations, but I'm like, where's Sabbath going? Why is, Randy Rhoads just passed away and we don't know what's going to happen. Why isn't Ozzy coming back in the fold? They were going to play at Live Aid eventually with him. I actually met Ron Keel, and at some point, I don't know, it was before this album or after this album, where Ron Keel says that he was approached by he was auditioning for Black Sabbath, and all they talked about was getting Ozzy back in the band. So I don't know. There's a lot of legend here in this album. It was interesting. is Zero the Hero Paradise City? Did they take that riff? The Stonehenge in Spinal Tap came from this. I love the fact they played Supernaut, which is my absolute favorite Black Sabbath song, and they pulled that out live. So that blew my mind. But as far as the conglomeration of the output here, Black Sabbath and Ian Gillan, I expected a lot more. And I give this a solid 6. There's a few good songs on it. The production's horrible. And I expected a lot more. And the output from Sabbath with Dio and Ozzy and the output from Gillan, whether it Deep Purple or the Gillan Band, and in comparison to what Dio had just released, I just thought it was very average. So I give it a 6.
Nice.
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to throw it over to Martin Popoff. We know where to find you, martinpopoff.com, and let us know what you think of Born Again.
Okay, so I'll mention a few things, dance around here with some factoids and whatnot that haven't been mentioned yet. Yes, Tracy Guns. I remember distinctly interviewing him at the back of the bus one time, and he told me that when he was in Guns N' Roses, they did base that on. They did base Paradise City on Zero the Hero. I wanted to read something. This is from my, I did these 2 Black Sabbath books, right? And one of them is actually called Born Again, because I do like this album a lot. And that's a shot from the Born Again tour. But Pete Resty, who was there with them, who sadly has passed on. He had some complications from some surgery, I believe, or he had an accident, and then he was in hospital, and he died in hospital when he wasn't supposed to be dying. He was a good Facebook friend, but I actually interviewed him for the Born Again book. I know I've read this somewhere else, and I hope to heck it wasn't on Contrarians for any reason. I don't think it was. Does anybody remember me reading about the trash story somewhere? No? Good. So Peter says, I'm Peter in the song lyric from Trashed. And he goes, we just picked up a new car for Bill Ward that day, brand new that he'd never even driven yet. It was a Ford. They make them here, but they're way better over here. I can't remember the name, the common one over here, but they are so nice over there. It's a 4-door. It could cruise 100 miles per hour, no problem. They had V6s in them, real nice car. Anyways, we're recording at the manor, and the front yard of the manor has a 9-hole golf course with this giant 10th century manor house built into the foreground of it. Okay. In the lower quadrant, it borders a canal, goes across the back of it, and across the canal is a church where the priest was disturbed, okay? But on the canal, Gillan went down and bought a rubber raft and a 25 horsepower Mercury outboard motor on the back of it so he could ride down the canal down to the pub and then back safely, not going on the highway. So I took Bill Ward's new car, drove it down to the pub. Ian took his boat, and I met him down there. We were sitting there drinking Bell Scotch and Cokes. What's that bottle there behind the other 2? And she had 2 bottles of Jose Cuervo Gold. And she goes, fucking hell, mate, that's been here for 30 years. She laughs. She says, do you want it? I said, yes, we'll take 2. Thank you. So Ian and I drank 1 bottle of it at the pub with salt and lemons. And I got in the car, and Ian got in his boat, and I met him back at the manor. But I got there before he did, so I drove the car across the golf course and down. We had a go-kart track down at the bottom of the manor, and I started doing laps waiting for him to come down the canal. So while I'm out there flying around this track, several people at the house come out and start watching on the hill. They're all applauding, having a laugh. And Ian comes down, he finally arrived, drunken voice. Yeah, let me try it. And I slide over, and, we're in a right-hand drive vehicle now, okay? I slid over, and Ian jumps in the driver's seat. Gets about 3/4 of the way around there and gets off into the weeds, off exploring. Okay. And hit a piece of concrete as big as a Chevy van. And we flipped the car right over on its roof. Okay. And the car skidded down on its roof, spinning around. And I'm trying to think of the verse right now. He says, the ground was in my sky. And we stopped short of going into an old abandoned Olympic-sized swimming pool. Got very lucky, because if we would have gone in, the thing was filled with old tires and debris and stuff. We never would have been able to open the door for us to get out. We would have drowned probably. But anyway, when the car went over the concrete, it broke the gas tank in half, and the gas tank is floating through the air. Ian's hanging upside down with his seatbelt on, which is stuck. I'm out of the car already. He's got a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. The gasoline runs down his body, soaks his leg, goes down, runs down his face, goes up the other end of the cigarette, and puts it out. because it needs an open spark for the flame to ignite. It just snuffed it. But I thought the whole thing was going to go, man. But the thing is, if you took a cigarette and you poured gasoline on it while it was lit, the gasoline would soak the cigarette. When it hits the end of the cigarette, the hot coal, it goes out. It doesn't burst into flames. It smothers it. The gasoline had run right down his face, down that cigarette, and put it out. Asked what they did for the rest of the evening, Pete says, well, I kicked the windshield out so I could get him out of the car and get him out of the seatbelt. And then we just went up and drank the other bottle of tequila. And that's the song, man. Got trashed, trashed the car, got trashed again. So that was Pete's story, who is no longer with us. So there's the detailed true story of trash. So yeah, as Peter says, interesting. They start with a big fast one. Just a couple things I'll say about this notoriously muddy production. I was listening to it today with good earbuds, and I listened to those songs on side 2 Hotline and Digital Bitch, and it literally just sounds like all you can hear is hitting a big wet snare and a hi-hat that's a little bit open. All you don't hear bass drums really. The bass, you don't hear articulation on the bass guitar at all. There's just this bass wallow. So all you hear driving those songs is constantly. That's the beat, right? You do hear a little more here and there all over the place. The other thing that's interesting about this production is that we all know it's muddy and it's harsh, but I think we all forget that when it gets really harsh is when Tony solos. He's got the most screeching distortion on those solos. It is so noisy that if you've forgotten how bad the production is, as soon as he hits a guitar solo, you remember again, right? Another thing I wanted to mention was I got this thought when listening to these today, Digital Bitch and Hotline, which I totally love. But it's one of these situations where, have you ever heard songs that you think, don't attempt to cover this song because the mechanics of it are not all that great. The riff on these two songs, Digital Bitch and Hotline, are kind of pedestrian. The production ain't great. The the vocal or the lyrics aren't great, but I love them because they sound like tanks rolling through the desert in northern Africa, because the atmosphere that is built with all the sonics and the performances and everything going on with this crazy production makes them songs that sound impressive and great here, but they sound like songs that if anybody tried to cover them and do anything differently and clean this up and that and to kind of perform it a little bit better and do some things to it, it would actually just make them worse. So there's a lot of songs out there in the world that you figure almost every cover would be better than the original. And then there are songs like this where you go, don't attempt to cover that because you could only make it worse. And that's what I love about those songs. I think Born Again is really cool. I think, Reed, you said it reminded you of Planet Caravan. That's a great comparison. But I find it to be this really cool, dark, mellow thing. I'm not bored by it. And speaking of not bored, Keep It Warm is one of the few, compared to anything on Dehumanizer or the Heaven and Hell band when they get slow, or Dio in later life when he got slow and I would easily get bored. I'm not bored at all by Keep It Warm. I think it's just a really cool, it is a good riff. I think it's the best riff on side 2. And then the last thing I wanted to say that's a little bit different that maybe people don't point out very much. There's a lot of bluesy Ian Gillan singing on this. There's not a lot of blues on the album. There's one kind of bluesy passage break thing in Keep It Warm when Tony does a solo over. But what I found really interesting is there's a lot of blues phrasing and phraseology and even vocal melody. And you can hear that on Zero the Hero's vocal. You can hear it on Hotline's vocal, and you can hear it on Keep It Warm's vocal. So it's almost like he is tapping these blues roots to stick on this music, which is not blues at all, and which I found kind of interesting as well. And last thing, I'll agree that the lyrics aren't particularly great on this album. He is really tossing stuff up and realizing it's a silly situation that he's in, so he's going to be even sillier than he is in the Gillan band with his wordplay and just general silliness, living out in his tent on the grounds and all that kind of stuff, right? And blowing things up. Yeah, exactly. So it's all just a lark for him. It's a lot of fun. He's realizing that if I did this devil stuff, as I'm jogging today, listening to this record, I played Headless Cross after, and I hate that record. I mean, I don't know why people like Headless Cross, but anyways, I listen to that, and you hear all this spooky devil stuff, and you realize if you're gonna have to do a Black Sabbath album, it's better to do the Ian Gillan approach than try to make it like a B grade horror movie thing. That's why I don't like a lot of a lot of this jump the shark Black Sabbath stuff. But I don't know if it works particularly good. I'm with Joe on this. Surrounding this is the three Ozzy albums, 2 Dio albums, 4 or 5 Gillan albums, Mob Rules and Heaven and Hell, and Born Again really can't compete. But I think it's still a worthy, cool, brave, interesting thing. I often call AC/DC Flick of the Switch AC/DC's Born Again, right? Just because it's the outlaw album. It's the cool outlaw album in the whole thing. So there you go. I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10.
Martin, I have a question. You brought up covering the songs. Ian Gillan had that album where he covered his own songs throughout his career. What do you think of the version of Trashed on that?
It was pretty good. In most of what was on there was pretty good because it was quite beefy, right? If I recall correctly, everything was very beefy and beefed up on it. And see, here's the thing, Joe, you can actually improve on probably a lot of the Gillan songs because they were pretty trashy and thin sometimes, not particularly thin. I mean, it was an eccentric production thing they did there. I mean, all of the Gillan catalog is a little bit down this Born Again pathway when it comes to production. It's pretty noisy stuff, right? And you mentioned Men of War. I mean, that's a perfect example. Or I'll Rip Your Spine Out. I'll Rip Your Spine Out sounds a lot like it could have been right on this record, right? Big echoey drums and so they made a lot of noise as well. But it's funny. I almost can picture a lot of Gillan songs fitting in this idea of don't attempt to cover that. But then I can also picture a lot of them thinking you probably could improve on some of these. So I don't know.
Very cool. And last but certainly never least, Ryan from Ryan's Vinyl Destination. I'm dying to hear what you think about Born Again.
Well, this is an interesting album. It's really hard for me to actually talk about because I've gone up and down with it so many times. I first heard this album when I was young, probably like 13, 14, and I liked it a lot. And I really enjoyed it for a while. But then it got old for me. I was just like, as I got older, I liked the album less and less and less. Just like, I don't know. There's like some songs that are kind of cool on it. But when I compare it to the rest of Sabbath's catalog, or when I even can compare it to a lot of other music of the time, I'm like, it really doesn't hold up very well at all, like for me at least. And one thing that I thought of as I was trying to prepare for this, because I just usually kind of shrug it up, oh yeah, that's a cool album when I talk to people about this album, just because I don't even know 100% how I felt about it. I was thinking if a smaller band came out with this album and I just had to review the album, like I was writing a review, how would I rate this review? What would I give it? Without it having Black Sabbath's name, without it having Ian Gillan, who's one of my favorite vocalists, without having the members of Black Sabbath as the band. And I was like, I probably would not give this a positive review at all. And so with that being said, there's qualities of it that are like so bad it's good. Kind of like that movie, The Room, or, stuff like that. There's things I enjoy about this album. And I think a few of the songs are quite enjoyable. I think that going through the tracks, Trash, I've never really enjoyed very much. I think that there's really cool things about it. It has a good energy to it. I think a lot of Ian's vocals work on it. I don't like that weird down, 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 down kind of stuff. Like the keyboards or whatever that is. I think that's so cheesy and dated. It just does not hold up at all. But it has a good energy, that song. The chorus is kind of cool too. I will say one thing about, before I go into further tracks, I think that while I like Ian's screams a lot in Deep Purple's catalog, I think they feel very forced on this album. He feels like a parody of himself doing them on this. It just doesn't have the same context as it does when you listen to like songs off of In Rock, like what is it, Bloodsucker and stuff, or where he goes into some of the higher notes, or Child in Time, where those show so much like pain and anguish as he's talking about the song of the casualties of war. I feel like this one, they were just sitting in the studio, oh, scream again, Ian, scream again. Like, that's just kind of what it feels like to me. Like, you could do this, make the album sound good. Like, that's what it feels like to me. So then we go into Stonehenge. I'm all for like experimental stuff, but I don't know. The instrumentals on this one go too long for what they are. I mean, it literally sounds like my stomach rumbling when like when I like haven't eaten for too long, and like it's like 2 minutes long. Like if it was like 20 seconds long, fine, but it's 2 minutes. It's way overblown. Disturbing the Priest. Amazing riff. I do think that Ian's screams work well on this song just because it is creating like a terrifying atmosphere. I think production-wise, this one also sounds pretty good for the most part. I think that some of the chord changes throughout, like as it's going from like the verses to the chorus and stuff, I guess kind of a chorus. Some of that's real distorted and muffled and kind of gross sounding. But I think the main riff sounds awesome on this. I love Tony's harmonics that he does on it. Definitely one of the better parts of the album, even though it's not really a structured song at all. It's just more like chaos than anything. And I like that. The Dark, same thing as before, but I think it works better than Stonehenge just because it's half the runtime. And the way that it goes into Zero the Hero is perfect. And so I think that Zero the Hero, awesome riff. I think the verses work pretty well on that song. Once again, I hate that like down the keyboard kind of stuff on this one. And I love keyboards in music, but they just sound terrible, coupled with the production that sounds like something I could have done on GarageBand on my iPad when I was a kid. Like, it just does not work well production-wise there. But heavy song, I like the riff. I think the Ian sounds pretty good. Even though I think the lyrics on that song, along with the rest of the album, are pretty bad. Side 2, I actually think is stronger than side 1. Because it doesn't have all the pointless instrumentals. And I think that some of the songs are a bit more tight. Digital Bitch, I think, is one of the stronger songs on the album, even though I think, once again, the lyrics are pretty stupid and I don't like the chorus on the song at all. I think it's really cheesy and it does not fit the heavy metal vibe at all. But I think the verses on this one and the main riff are pretty cool. I mean, it definitely has more of a Deep Purple feel, and I feel like it fits Ian better because I think on some of the stuff that's not really as Deep Purple sounding, he just doesn't work for me vocally at times. I think that every song has parts where he fits really well, and then there's parts where he doesn't. And that's basically how I feel about this whole album. Some things work, some things don't. Born Again, production's awful. I think the music is interesting, though. It has a kind of warm feel to it. I think that Ian has some parts on it that sound amazing. I think he sounds great in the verses when he's doing a bit more of a gentle type of vocal. I think when he does some of the screaming and stuff, I do actually really like it on this one because it feels powerful again. Like it actually feels like it has context and not just frantic screaming for no reason. Like, it feels like it actually has context. It hits me emotionally. But I think when he's actually singing stuff like the beginning of the choruses, it's kind of rough. It doesn't fit for me personally. Hotline, I really like. It's probably my favorite song on this album, actually. It's just a tight song, has a good structure to it. I think it's kind of rained down a little bit, so it actually gives room to be a really good song. The production, for the most part, works on that song. I mean, there's some parts that don't sound great, but for overall, it's one of the better recorded songs. And then Keep It Warm, it's fine. I just don't really feel too much for it. It's a good song, though. So I can't say that I hate this album, but I don't think it's a very good album at all. I think there's things I enjoy about it. I've listened to it many times, but I don't know in the future if I'll be listening to it much anymore. I think listening to it multiple times in a row recently just kind of made me realize I'm past this album. I understand why people like it. Me personally, I just don't really care for it, and I think it's one of the worst Black Sabbath albums. And if I had to give it a rating, I'd probably say like a 4.5.
Wow. Okay.
Say, Martin, maybe you know. I was going to say, I know when Gillan was writing lyrics for his albums with Gillan, he famously would make them record tracks first and then write lyrics to finish tracks. Do you have any idea if he did these lyrics that way for this album?
No, I can't quite remember how that would have worked, but they would have been pretty spontaneous, obviously. But no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
How much did the Deep Purple reunion play into this whole project falling apart?
Yeah, I think it definitely did. That was in the works. I mean, that was kind of semi in the works even when he was breaking up Gillan, right? So, yeah, I think, and I don't think ticket sales were that great either. And we know record sales weren't great. So it was pretty much the writing was on the wall. The reviews weren't great. This stuff about playing Smoke on the Water live with Black Sabbath and all that, I think Ian was very happy to see, this thing that's probably going to do better. And it obviously did because it went platinum, right?
Hey, Martin, I was curious because one of the things I wrote down when I was listening to this in relation to the sound and the issues that come with this record, I just wrote one question. What happened to Martin Birch? And I was curious he didn't go with Dio when Ronnie went off, and he certainly didn't come here. We know that he did Maiden, Peace of Mind came out, and he had, I don't know if there's a White Snake or another record that came out in 83. But I was curious as to why maybe he didn't at least stick with one of those two camps.
I think by this point in time, Joe, you might know this too, but by this point in time, hadn't he done that famous commitment to Maiden to only produce Maiden records from now moving forward?
Yeah, I believe so.
One other thing I wanted to mention, I forgot to mention this. So there's the famous Iommi quote that says, "We just thought it sounded a bit funny, but it went very wrong somewhere between the mix and the mastering and the pressing of that album. The sound was really dull and muffly." He says in his autobiography, Iommi explains that Gillan inadvertently blew a couple of tweeters in the studio speakers by playing the backing tracks too loud and nobody noticed. If the tweeters were blown, wouldn't this have more treble on it because you thought, oh, it's sounding muffly, but it's like it doesn't have enough treble. So this sensible reversed quote would have been, "Oh, Ian blew a couple of woofers and we thought it sounded funny." And then they go away and realize all the bass is there. But the fact of the matter is, if you say we blew some tweeters, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It's coming out muffly, but if you blew some tweeters, you'd go away and play it and go, wow, it has way more treble than we thought. That's not the case. Treble's what's missing.
Martin Birch would go on to do Slide It In right after this. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Which I think that plays into here, though, too, because Slide It In came in early 84, I think, and you have John Sykes on the American version. Again, I'm pitting this against Born Again. I like the album. It's okay, but there's, the whole Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, Gillan family, Dio family, put out a better output. And that's why I just think it's average.
Slide It In could have been also a pretty prolonged thing. So that decision to go only with Maiden could have been, halfway through Slide It In kind of thing. Slide It In could have been almost reaching back. I'm just spitballing here. I'm not sure, but because the previous album goes all the way back to 82, right? With Whitesnake, I believe. Saints and Sinners would be it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Come and Get It's 81. So you got 82, and then that thing comes out in 84, right? I believe. Slide It In. It's not an 83 album, I don't think.
I wasn't sure.
I will point out. Oh, sorry. I bought
It's around there. It's around there. Because is there anything else, Joe, besides Slide It In, or is that it for Martin Birch and it's Maiden Forever from then? I can't think of anything else that he would have done.
I think that's about it. I'm trying to do a little research here as we speak, but yeah.
He did Michael Schenker Assault Attack in 82.
Yes.
Right?
82, right.
For an 82 album.
And Reed brought up, with the whole satanic thing, you got Merciful Fate and Venom. I mean, that was scary stuff. So this was comical to me with the Devil Baby. And I don't know, it was, this didn't even fit into that. The satanic stuff that Merciful Fate and Venom were putting out were just, that was kind of...
That's the thing is, Merciful Fate and Venom, I think, believed in their product. In terms of actual reaction to the music, though, no. There is nothing Merciful Fate ever did. They're a good band. They did some good songs. They wrote some evil lyrics, but they never wrote anything that had the emotional impact of the dark going into Zero the Hero. Nothing they ever did. But I was going to say, I bought a 2004 remaster of this album. And it's a digital, but it's a high quality digital because I don't listen to lossy audio anymore, MP3s. So it's high quality. It's 24 kilohertz, I think. So, a really good sound source, and you can hear all of the instruments. So when I was in high school, all I had was a dubbed cassette. So that wasn't really the best sound comparison probably. But I will say now, listening to a good set of headphones on that 2004 remaster, I think it sounds fine.
I have a full disc of the unmixed demos, which are very different sounding than what the final production was. They're cleaner, have a little more separation in the instrumentation. I mean, Martin, you were so dead on. One of the staples of Bill Ward as a drummer is his great fill playing in his classic style. I can't think of one drum fill in this album. Not one. There isn't nothing. There's nothing there.
Yeah.
All right,
I can picture, because I just played it, I could picture a couple big snare things really fast. But, you think of, I think it's in Disturbing the Priest for sure. There's some big fast, but I can't picture a single tom-tom.
No, I can't either.
Top of my head. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so our average rating, despite the couple of 10s that we got, 10 out of 10s, our average rating is 7.75. So that's a pretty solid rating, I think, still. A pretty decent album. And I want to thank everybody for showing up today, and check the link in the description for all of our plugs. And thanks, everybody, for coming by. Like and subscribe to the Contrarians, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Later.